minutes just to make sure we're not encroaching too much on our meeting after this, on the in-camera meeting. So, Mr. Mato, over to you. Please try and make it brief.
Sí, gracias, presidente.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I wanted to raise a point in connection with one of the delegated acts. The Tirla in Italy. This is about going down to 20 from the limit of 25 millimeters. We're completely opposed to this, so I can tell you that we are not going to be supporting this particular delegated act. We feel that there is no conclusive evidence that permits us to stick to that minimum. It ought to be minimum 25 millimeters for everything. This is leading to completely unfair competition, and there's no specific line of reasoning that can back up this type of action. So I'd like to make it official, though of course I will restate this in the coordinators meeting. I am against this draft delegated act. Thank you.
Okay, je passe la parole à
Thank you. I shall now give the floor to Ms. Carvalhais. Please try and stick to 2 minutes.
I'll be very brief, Chairman. It's a statement more than a question. Just wanted to say that my political group will be calling for an extension of the period of analysis of the delegated act on the MCRS for Venus shells in certain Italian territorial waters. Our group wants to garner more information so that we'll have a clearer grasp of all the implications. We talk a lot about a level playing field, and that's very much what's at stake here, and that's how we want to proceed on this. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Carvalhais. Madame Bilbao.
Thank you. Ms. Bilbao, please.
Sí, gracias, presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Well, Chirla and the length of Chirla appears to be a matter of some concern for all of us. And we've had reactions from the sector itself. For years, we've been asking for explanations on this 25 millimeter length in one country, 20 millimeters in others. And there's really nothing solid on the table for us to be able to understand the situation. So, minimum length of mussels is what I'm referring to here. And I think that it would make sense to have a meeting among stakeholders and countries, because what you're looking at here is inequality between fishermen who are working in the same fishery. And this contradicts our common fisheries policy. And it goes against the principles of the single market as well, of having transparency and effectiveness among different fisheries and member states. This is certainly very fishy indeed, and it's leading to a great deal of concern. So we'd very much like to have an exchange on this, and we will be objecting to this measure if no explanations are forthcoming. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Rose.
Thank you, Ms. Rose, please.
No. Madame Conte.
No, Ms. Conte.
Gli studi scientifici condotti in questi anni hanno dimostrato.
Scientific studies have shown that fishing of small mussels in Italian waters has no harmful environmental biological effect. 2 scientific committees have confirmed 22 millimeter MCRS will allow us to conserve stocks without a harmful impact on the level of local resources. On the contrary, in the delegated act, the situation of stocks is seen as being stable. There are certain trade problems, but the report refers to a good state of the stocks in Italy. The problem is more to do with trade than environmental conservation. There's unfair competition directly harming the country. I can understand the various concerns from Spain, but it seems to me that market issues need to be addressed elsewhere. There's no lack of fora where this could be done institutionally or in the sector.
Oui, Madame Aguilera.
Ms. Aguilera, please.
Well,
I too am getting on the mussel train. And I'm sorry to say that this delegated act, quite frankly, is a joke. I imagine that we'll have a report from Italy talking about the reduction in the length of mussels in the Adriatic Sea. What we want to see here is an exception from the Commission on the caliber of the mussel. There was this exception 1 year, another year, and then they're talking about another 2 years. When I heard of this delegated act, I requested more information. And we were told that this reduction, with regard to the technical specifications in that part of Italy, is not a problem at all in light of the scientific assessment for the recovery of the species, and that's the way things are. This state of exception hasn't been sufficiently justified. There's not enough evidence to back it up. So I'm going to be speaking out firmly on this. What this is leading to is infringements on the market and damage done. It's always difficult to negotiate on this, as our colleague Mr. Mato can testify to. The Commission doesn't like exceptions. But every year, they're quite happy to grant this exception. So as my spokesperson said, we're going to be requesting a further 2 months, and the most likely outcome is that we're going to be opposing this delegated act. We believe that for now, credible scientific arguments have not been presented to justify this course of action. And we are going to be questioning the scientific evidence that's provided unless there's real solid proof that is given. We think this is all rather shaky and obeys to a political will rather than anything else.
Monsieur González.
Thank you, Ms. Aguilera. Mr. González Casares, please.
The other business, sorry.
Donc on fera à la fin.
Okay. We'll have AOB at the end then. No other questions on the delegated acts? Well, I would suggest that the Commission perhaps try to respond. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et tout d'abord,
thank you very much, Chairman, and good morning, everyone.
To maybe stress several elements that will put the frame about this delegated act. First of all, to remind that Article 15 of the Technical Measures Regulation, which provides with the annex with the technical measures in the different sea basins, is there also to take into account the regional specificities, and that the Commission is empowered to propose a delegated act based on a joint recommendation from the Member States to amend, supplement, for example, the technical measures in the annexes. And then the second point that I would like to underline is that here we have one of the most positive scientific advice in the Mediterranean, and that the tendency continue to be the same. The stock has never been in such a good shape since 2016. And indeed, this is a derogation that was in place since 2016, and that was renewed on several occasions. We have done an intensive work with Italy, who has been applied rigorously all the measures provided for in the different derogation. And if we come back to the technical measures regulation, we have to abide by the provisions of the technical measures derogation, and notably its Article 15.4. I won't here read the whole text, but here we have to base ourselves on the biology and not on consideration concerning the market or trade in the fisheries product, because they're out of the scope of the technical measures. The Commission can only use as a basis the provisions from the technical measures. And the Stakeford advice which has assessed over the years this derogation, which has been asked for 3 years, is very clear about the biology. And I don't know if you have if you want me to enter into those details of the biology, but just to summarize that the STEC has a positive advice on this, and the Commission has to base itself on this, on the STEC advice, and not to take into consideration the market aspects. I don't know if my colleague wants to add some points.
Yes, thank you. On the scientific advice, just a couple of points that are relevant. STEC recognized that the Italian joint recommendation presents a number of progress in terms of collection of information and update of information. And the main indication is that the clams in the Adriatic reach sexual maturity between 11 and 11.5 millimeters. So that is well far from the requested derogation at 22 and even further from 25. So STEC concludes that a derogation to 22 millimeters is still consistent with the objectives of ensuring the protection of the stock and the juveniles. And overall, STEC expects this measure to be precautionary as to prevent the stock collapse and minimize the impact of fishing. And these are words of STEC, not ours. There is an important recognition that the Italian plan is a very valid one. This was adopted in 2019 and includes a number of provisions that are going in the sense of a robust and sustainable management of the stock, including reduced number of fishing days, restocking areas, rotations, reduced daily CPUEs, 2 months closure for the fishery, monitoring, control, and market measures. And STEC also concluded that this, in terms of impact on the habitat, a reduction of the MCRS would not be a problem, and actually the opposite, so reverting to 25 millimeters could increase the level of fishing and dredging for this stock. So on the basis of these elements, really, so the improved scientific advice, the national management plan, the Commission and the advice of STEC, as well as a positive advice of MEDAC, the Commission concluded that there is a basis for granting this derogation. And as already said, based on the scientific evidence, and as long as the STEC advice is positive, the Commission is empowered to grant such derogations. Thank you.
Merci, cher monsieur.
Thank you. Is anyone else looking for the floor? From the Commission, I mean to say. Oh, are we all happy, Gabrielle, then? Thank you, Chairman. Well, welcome once again. I'm glad to hear what the Commission has to say about what needs to be done before any delegated or implementing act goes through. You have to take all the necessary measures, have the proper scientific studies carried out, as well as socio-economic impact studies. Oh, well and good. Well, we'll do the same then. We've just brought out the fact that this is not being done. You only do this when it suits you. Didn't do it when 87 fishing grounds were closed down without any consultation, using out-of-date reports, taking no stock of what the sector had to say, and exceeding your powers in the process. So once again, you know, why should we be giving the Commission powers? It just does what it wants. We have to be consistent here as elsewhere. We need to look beyond the scientific reports. You need to take stock of the socio-economic realities, as you do in the Commission when it suits you, but not when it doesn't suit you. And in this committee, and certainly the EPP members, we're not going to go along with this anyway.
Sí,
Ms. Aguilera. Thank you. All I want to say is that we will take a fresh look at this. That's why we're asking for another 2 months so that we can analyse the whole scientific study and see what it says. And we'll look at the problems that have arisen and get a clear scientific picture of what's actually going on in the Gulf of Cadiz, because this simply cannot go on anymore. I'll be as blunt about it as that. We raised this issue. It's important that we have this 2 months extension. I repeat that there are weaknesses in the report. As Mr. Marta has said, welcome the latest study, but when you're talking about an implementing act, such as will apply to these fishing areas with vulnerable ecosystems using 2011 data, well, you're not using the latest information. So sometimes you provide justification for certain proposals and not for others. I'm saying this for the sake of the consistency of the Commission's work. We're going to take a very tough approach with the implementing act when it's tabled regarding the vulnerable protected ecosystems, because we take the view that you have not used up-to-date proper scientific evidence, let alone looked at the socioeconomic consequences. So, fine with the Venus shells, but here when we say there's an ecocide going on, you're doing nothing. And there's the fishing sector trembling in the light of what's coming. So let's be more consistent in everything we do in European measures. Ms. Conte. May I say to our dear Spanish colleagues, you know perfectly well what the situation is. Nothing new. There's lots of up-to-date scientific data which is constantly monitored. You have commercial interests. You don't want smaller clams, our smaller clams, into your market, but it's a free market. I have to say that we're getting more of your clams on our market. So the scientific studies are perfectly robust.
Ok. Bon, je sens que Madame Bilbao.
All right then, Ms. Bilbao.
Sí, presidente. No voy a
Chairman, I'm not going to repeat what's already been said, but I think one thing has emerged very clearly here, which members of the Fisheries Committee have been saying throughout this parliamentary term, and that included the time of the difficult COVID situation. The Commission needs to listen more carefully to the sector. The whole sector, all the various facets of it, feels that they're really out of the picture. All the messages being sent from the Commission amount to suggesting that the fisheries sector is made up of semi-criminals. The Commission has an opportunity to put this right. Today, in the light of what's been said to my colleagues, I'll say no more, we all agree. We've seen there are contradictions between the way certain proposals are handled. In some cases, apparently we need reports, others we don't. What's actually going on? I want to send out this message to you today to the Fisheries Commissioner, who needs to react. There's still some time to listen to the sector and take the necessary measures to ensure that we have a competitive sector, which has been making huge efforts, particularly bearing in mind we're talking about resilience, European competitiveness, reducing our dependency on others. What we're doing is the absolute opposite. The European fishery sector is being pared down. The figures there to show this. And we're depending more and more on imports from third countries, and we don't know what the fisheries practices that they're using, but we know perfectly well they don't fish the way we do with the same rules or the same values. And so the time has come to decide what model are we going for. It's not all about protecting the seas. You also need to bear in mind socio-economic and environmental balance. And that's the job the Commission has to do, however difficult it may be, just like us. Thank you.
Rapidement, Monsieur Matteau.
Please be brief, Mr. Matto. Yes, just 10 seconds. May I say to our dear Italian colleague, market rules, a free market, yes, but there have to be the same rules of the game for everyone. If it's 25 millimetres for the Spanish, then it should also be 25 millimetres for the Italian fishermen. Thank you.
Bien. Je pense que nous ne fermerons.
Right. Well, we're not going to be able to bring this debate to a conclusion today, so we'll return to this when dealing with delegated acts. Now, the PowerPoint presentation from the Commission about delegated acts will be sent to you by email immediately after the meeting. Any other business? Yeah. Mr. Gonzalez, you had your hand up just now. Thank you. A lot has been said here. People want to discuss various issues on the agenda. We have a problem with bottom fishing techniques, clearly, and we see the Commissioner rejects any proposal from this committee or from the sector, and we're heading for a disaster. That disaster will have a socio-economic impact, which has not been properly gauged by the Commission. That's unacceptable. So, we call upon the Commissioner to come out, perhaps he's not in a position to do this right now, but take the time that's needed, but needs to do something before the implementing act comes to force, because we're facing an extremely serious situation. The double standards have already been mentioned, depending on which measure you're assessing. That's unacceptable in a government, in an executive. You need to apply the same rules to everyone. And if you assess the position in one instance, you have to take the same approach with another. If we want to do a serious job, let me reiterate this. The Commission is stirring up the sector. It's generating anti-European feeling. That's what it's doing. By putting environmental sustainability above socioeconomic stability. The fishing rules have to be based on a balance. But that balance is now being completely flouted. And if we continue this direction, we're all going to be in a past position, not just the fishing communities, but those of us representing the citizens in the institutions. They're not going to understand these decisions. So the time has come for us to think this through. The point has been hammered home time and again here. We need a serious debate regarding the scope of this implementing act and the need for an urgent revision of the conditions attached to it. Thank you.
Sí, gracias, presidente. En relación.
Mr. Mato, thank you, Chairman. Regarding the unfair closure of the 87 fishing grounds, what you cannot do is say one thing here and then do the exact opposite. The European People's Party group envisaged summoning the Commission to explain the situation next week, with the effect of the implementing act being suspended. But I've just been informed that in the Socialist and Renew groups and the Greens, despite this morning's meeting and Ms. Miranda's banners, they've actually opposed this item being debated in the plenary next week. You can say sorry as much as you like, but there's no excuse for this. For one thing, because next week we have the plenary prior to the entry into force of this implementing act. So if you use any excuse to put this after the second part session in October, we're going to lag even further behind. So having said that, I think we all agree we want to defend the fishing sector. The thing is, some of us take that defence one way and others proceed differently. Thank you, Ms. Kovacic. No, that's not true, Chairman. We're not opposed to this being taken on the agenda next week. We can't allow lies to be told about this very serious situation. We're not opposed to debate. Our view is that the debate in the second October part session will provide the possibility for the Commissioner to come face to face, as a colleague was suggesting. Because, according to information, is unlikely to come to Strasbourg next week. So our goal is having set up is to avoid us setting out our positions without having the Commission there. Doesn't make sense. It does make sense to have the Commissioner there. That's what's at stake. So let's not weaken each other's position here. Right, I'm sorry. We're not going to be allowed. We're not going to allow ourselves to be seen as a scapegoat. Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. And then I think we have to leave this. Well, things being as they are, anything can happen. But those involved in the sector know that the human factor is the most important thing. We, in the Socialist opposition, want to hold talks with the Commissioner. I'll talk to you, Mr. Mato, happily, and all the other colleagues in the Fisheries Committee any time, but we want to debate with the Commissioner. We need to have him there. If he's not there, for whatever reason it may be, I assume you'll be familiar with his reasons, then we need to take a more stringent position and with some political respect and humanity. Above and beyond political debate, you have people there, and you need to show respect for people.
Madame Miranda.
Merci.
Ms. Miranda, thank you, Chairman. Thank you for giving me the floor again. At a very difficult juncture for the sector and for my country, and for many families who are going to be out of jobs, and for other people. So now, Galicia lives from the fisheries. Let's defend it. That's what I put in my poster. I'm perfectly entitled to bring this out in this committee and say whatever I like. This isn't a political meeting. This is a political defence of the fisheries community in my country, Galicia. So kindly don't step on my toes. I've been very polite and you know, I've been working in this committee as in earlier parliamentarians. I can say whatever I like as I defend the fisheries sector and I defend my country. The second point, over the last 3 parliamentary terms, we've seen that the issue of using delegated acts to pass legislation, your colleague Ms. Fraga said this some years ago. Let me reiterate what she said. This is an issue that she, Mr. Nogueira, amongst other members, dwelt on at the time, and we had a unanimous agreement. Legislation via delegated acts leaves us out of the frame as we try to get the socio-economic factors built into his vision. We thought this was scandalous. Parliament unanimously rejected that. On the agenda, the plenary, we need to get the Commissioner there. There's no point to just letting off steam in the vacuum. On the 25th, and this is what we're going to do, we need to bring a delegation from the fisheries sector to this committee, together with people from other areas affected, so that they can speak out. We were not consulted. The socio-economic impact study was not carried out, so at the very least, our committee must give a hearing to the communities affected, because we are supposed to represent society.
Madame Rose.
Alors moi, au risque de me...
Thank you. At the risk of repeating what I've already said, what we have here is the implementation of legislation adopted by the European Parliament in 2016. We'd been awaiting the implementing act for 4 years. It's based on the best scientific advice. The industry's had 6 years to gear up for this. We can discuss this with the Commissioner, but I don't see how you could fail to implement legislation that was adopted back in 2016. As far as I'm concerned, the Commission's been doing its job. The Chair, thank you. Well, I understand that the Conference of Presidents has included this on the agenda for the 2nd October part session. We'll take due note of that. One minute each, Gabrielle and Clara, and then we must close. Thank you, Chairman. I would say that requesting that the debate be taken in the 1st October part session is not showing a lack of respect for anyone from it. But the point is getting it debated before the Act enters into force. Whether or not a given Commissioner is there, we're talking about the Commissioner, the collegiate body. Just because a particular Commissioner is not there doesn't mean that you're just venting in the void. The problem needs to be solved. And I wasn't attacking Ms. Miranda. I was just saying that what you say in the committee is one thing, and then you do something different. I had a point of other business, Chairman, regarding interpretation. Now, I understand the interpreter's rights, but if it clashes with the rights of members to speak and listen to their languages, it makes it difficult for members to take part remotely. I would suggest at the next coordinators meeting we look into this issue, because if we don't find a solution, I really think we should require all the committee meetings to be held in person. Otherwise, some will not be able to take part.
Merci.
Thank you very much indeed. That will be coordinators meeting. Clara, and then that's it. I think the fisheries sector should be respected. We all want a debate. That's been very clear. What we don't want are these implementing acts. Most of us have spoken here. We'll see what happens in plenary. One point. The Commission, European Commission, when it said, it talks about the data it had because it was data from 2011, whereas we have data from 2020 available. The Commission is saying that Spain hasn't provided the data. That's wrong. You'll have to show how that was not wrong next week in plenary. That's wrong that the Spanish government hasn't given the data to do with these implementing acts for these zones. That's wrong. The Commissioner, technical experts, they say this all the time. This is false. It's a false attack on the Spanish government. If it's not false, you have to come forward with papers next week in plenary, not just do it behind closed doors. You don't have updated data. There is updated data from Spain. This is very important, very serious. The Commission shouldn't continue to say behind closed doors that Spain isn't providing data. That's a lie, pure and simple.
Bien, je ne peux pas ne pas.
I have to give the floor to the Commission. Just a few words to you. Commission.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Actually, we were not planning to intervene on this specific point today here, but we are very happy to take the opportunity to clarify some of the things that may not be fully clear from a technical perspective. We are fully aware that this particular implementing act has been suscitating quite a lot of interest for a lot of good reasons. And maybe I should go a bit into the history of where this is coming from. As some of you have said, this is indeed coming from the 2016 regulation. The Commission has only implemented a very specific legal obligation that was lagging with more than 4 years now. The moment we have had the proper scientific advice delivered by ICES, which is a very well-respected body. Now, in terms of the data that is at the basis of this particular scientific advice, I just wanted to clarify what seems to be a bit of a misunderstanding. There are two components in the scientific advice. One is related to the footprint, so the area where deep sea fishing is still allowed after this implementing act. That particular bit is indeed based on data from 2009 to 2011. And the reason for that is because the reference period is fixed in the actual 2016 regulation. So we had no margin of maneuver to use other data than what is fixed in the piece of co-decided legislation from 2016. When it comes to the actual closures, so the closures for the protection of the VME's areas, those are based on data given by the member states up to 2018, when the final data call was issued by ICES. And ICES has worked 2019, 2020, in order to prepare this specific scientific advice. The advice has been prepared together for the first time in history of ICES, together with stakeholders. So all advisory councils were invited by ICES to provide feedback on the management scenarios that were afterwards included in the scientific advice. And we are just at the beginning of the process, together with the stakeholders and with ICES, which will be called to review this advice every single year from now on, which is again a legal obligation. And the Commission has stated on a number of opportunities, of occasions, that we will look into the revised ICES advice and adapt the implementing act as needed. One extra element that I wanted to add, the socio-economic aspect has been at the core of our discussions with the interested stakeholders and with ICES, in the sense that, again, for the very first time in history, the ICES advice includes a socio-economic element, which is the fishing intensity. And this has been, it's basically a very first attempt to look into the proper ecosystem approach to fisheries management. The fishing intensity is considered as an element for deciding on closures of areas with a low VME's presence. Of course, we have heard a lot of, let's say, very unhappy remarks from a number of people. We are very much aware of that. However, the only thing that the Commission has done, and I would like to stress this, is to implement a pre-existing legal obligation. And I would like to add one extra element here, which is the type of gears that are covered by this implementing act. I know this is something that is very much important for some of you. We know that long liners are considered by some in the outside world as being more selective. The long liners are included in the implementing act because they are already included by the 2016 regulation. We had no margin of maneuver whatsoever on the type of gears that are covered by this implementing act. And I would stop here because,
Thank you.
There have been a lot of...
Je suis désolé, mais on a une...
Apologies, but we do have a shadows meeting and we are eating in to the time for that meeting. I'm responsible, I know, but still. We will have this on the agenda on the 10th and we'll have the debate in plenary. We'll come back to all of these issues. I don't think it's necessarily going to resolve anything if we carry on now. We understand, Gabriel, there's a shadow meeting now, so I do have to close this item now. We'll come back to it at a later date. 10th of October, 3 to 6:30. No other questions? Okay, let's finish the meeting, the public meeting there, and we can move on to the behind closed door meetings. This is a shadows meeting, and this is restriction of access to uni waters. 2 minutes. We'll start again in 2 minutes.